She stood in his kitchen in the early morning light, scrambled eggs in the pan, his oversized shirt barely covering her thighs, humming a song her mother used to sing on Sunday mornings in Lagos, and for one devastating moment, she let herself believe this was hers. The warmth, the silence, the man somewhere upstairs who made her feel like the most interesting person in any room he walked into. She let herself believe it. And then he came downstairs, picked up his keys, straightened his tie, and said, without looking at her for more than 3 seconds, "Don't forget you have the latte tower brief on my desk by noon." Not good morning. Not last night was. Just the brief. By noon. She turned back to the eggs. She did not let him see her face. Because Jennifer Johnson had survived too much to fall apart over a man who had just reminded her, as casually as checking the weather, exactly what she was to him. Welcome to Afro-Korean Love Stories. On today's episode, I'm bringing you friendship, affection, romance, control, heartbreak, and unlawful relationships. If you're just joining us for the first time, hit that like button, subscribe, seat back, and allow me draw you into my world of tales. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd really love to know. Now, let's get back to this amazing story. Jennifer Johnson had not planned on Seoul. She had planned on London briefly and then on coming home to Lagos and building something steady. But opportunity has never cared much for plans, and when a business communications role opened at Sung and Park Holdings, one of Seoul's most prestigious corporate firms, her CV was already in the system before she'd finished reading the job description. She told her mother it was temporary. 12 months, maybe 18. She would learn, she would save, she would come back. That was 2 years ago. By the time this story begins, Jenny has stopped pretending she is leaving anytime soon. She has a small apartment in Mapogu with a window that gets good afternoon light. She has a dry cleaner she trusts and a pojangmaka stall 3 minutes from her door where the Ajumma gives her extra fish cake without being asked. She has Temi, her closest friend, fellow Nigerian, fellow survivor of Seoul's particular brand of beautiful loneliness, who lives 20 minutes away and answers the phone at any hour. And she has a job she is genuinely excellent at, coordinating events and communications for the firm with an attention to detail that has already earned her quiet respect from people 3 levels above her pay grade. What she also has, though she would not call it that out loud, is a situation. His name is Jang Min-jun, and she noticed him with that particular awareness that tells your body to pay attention before your brain has caught up. He was not in the office every day. That was part of it. He appeared, occasionally, without the specific predictability of a schedule, and every single time he did, the building responded. The noise would actually dim. Conversations would find their natural conclusion faster than usual. Junior staff who had been lounging in corridors would straighten almost involuntarily. Senior managers who ran their departments like small kingdoms would become, in his presence, noticeably less regal. Jenny watched all of this from her desk the first time and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He was tall. He wore dark suits, simply dressed, as though anything else would be a downgrade. His face was the kind of handsome that didn't announce itself, and his eyes, when they moved across a room, they did so with the complete unhurriedness of someone who has never once needed to rush toward anything in his life. She called Temi that evening from her bathroom floor, which was where she did her most honest thinking. "There is a man," she said, without preamble. Temi said, "Tell me everything." "He works with the firm. Or above the firm. I'm not entirely sure. But Temi, everybody bows to this man. Everybody. And the way he walks into a room, I don't know how to explain it. It's like the room was waiting for him." "Is he handsome?" Jenny paused for longer than necessary. "Temi, this man is dangerously handsome. The kind that should come with a government warning." Temi screamed. Jenny laughed. And then she put a firm lid on it, because she had not come to Seoul to embarrass herself over a man she did not know, who clearly existed in a completely different stratosphere, and who probably did not notice her any more than he noticed the furniture. She was professional. She was focused. She was smart enough to understand that whatever Sung and Park Holdings was on paper, Jang Min-jun was something considerably more layered underneath it. The deference was too deep. The silence around him was too deliberate. She went back to work. She told herself she was fine. An invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in her inbox between a catering confirmation and a venue logistics email. A private company launch celebration. Smart casual attire. Evening cocktails. An opportunity to connect with senior stakeholders in a more relaxed setting. She almost missed the address at the bottom. Hanam-dong. A residential street. She forwarded it to Temi with no message. Just the invitation. Temi replied in 40 seconds. Jenny, that's not a firm. That's somebody's house. I know, Jenny wrote back. Whose house? Jenny stared at the email for a moment. The event was listed under Minjun's private holdings umbrella. She had seen the name on enough internal documents to recognize it. I think it's his, she typed. There was a pause long enough that Jenny imagined Temi setting down whatever she was holding. You're going, Temi said. It was not a question. Obviously, Jenny replied. It's a work event. She spent 40 minutes on her outfit the night before, which she told herself was normal. The car pulled up to the address on a Friday evening, and Jenny understood immediately. Sitting in the back seat looking through the window, what sat beyond those gates was a mansion in the truest sense. Manicured hedges lined the approach. Staff moved near the entrance with quiet efficiency. Through the tall windows, she could already see people moving, glasses catching light, the particular shimmer of an evening that had been very carefully constructed. She got out of the car. She smoothed her skirt. She walked in like she belonged. Inside, the evening was everything the invitation had promised. Champagne passed on trays, conversation happening in clusters, the low, pleasant noise of a gathering that knew it was well-resourced. Jenny moved through it comfortably, greeting colleagues, accepting a glass, making the kind of easy small talk she was genuinely good at. She was present. She was professional. She was also, quietly, aware that she was inside Jang Minjun's home, and that awareness sat at the back of her mind like a second heartbeat. Curiosity, her mother had always said, was Jenny's greatest gift and her most persistent problem. She drifted from the main reception room, following the architecture of the house with complete attention. The corridor she turned into was quieter. The light here was different. She passed one closed door, and then came to another that was not quite closed, sitting a few inches open, warm light leaking from the gap, the low murmur of voices underneath it. She should have kept walking. She knew that even as she paused. She looked. The room held perhaps 8 men. They were not standing around with champagne glasses. They were seated in the specific configuration of people conducting serious business, the kind that does not get minuted. There were no laptops open, no presentations running. Just men, and the quality of attention between them, and at the head of it, unhurried, entirely composed, speaking in a voice too low for her to catch the words, Jang Minjun. He looked different in this room. Or perhaps more accurately, he looked entirely like himself in a way that the corporate context had only partially revealed. There was an authority here that went beyond seniority. These men were not deferring to a boss. They were deferring to something older and more absolute than a job title. Jenny was in the doorway for perhaps 5 seconds. She registered what she was looking at, cataloged it, and then pulled the door back to its original position with the steadiest hand she had ever produced in her life. She turned. She walked back down the corridor at a perfectly normal pace. She returned to the reception room. She picked up a fresh glass of wine from a passing tray. She found a corner near the window and positioned herself in it like a woman who had been standing there all evening, pleasantly and without incident. Her phone was already in her hand.
Temi.
I just saw something I was not supposed to see. The reply came fast. Jennifer Adiz Johnson. Hear me very well. You were looking for the bathroom. That is all you were doing. You go back into that party. You hold your wine like it owes you money. You smile at everyone who comes near you, and you act like the most unbothered woman in that building. Because you saw absolutely nothing. Jenny read it twice. Exhaled through her nose. Looked up. A man in a charcoal blazer was already approaching her with the particular smile of someone who had decided she was the most interesting person in the room. She gave him a warmer smile back and said something that made him laugh within 30 seconds. By the time a second man drifted over, she was already the quiet center of a small, easy conversation. Wine glass tilted just so, laugh arriving at exactly the right moments. If there was a woman in that room without a care in the world, it was Jennifer Johnson. She did not look toward the corridor once. The evening wound down the way good evenings do, gradually, then all at once. Guests gathered their things. Cars were called. The gentle machinery of departure set itself in motion. Staff moved through the rooms, collecting glasses and folding linens and restoring the space to its original dignity. And Jenny, because her mother had raised her and her grandmother had raised her mother, could not physically walk past a half-cleared table and treat it as someone else's problem. She set her clutch on a side chair. She looked around, confirmed no one was paying her particular attention, and began to help. She unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of her blouse because she was warm and movement required freedom. She reached back and unzipped her skirt a few inches at the side for the same reason.
She stacked.
She cleared. She hummed something low under her breath, an old fellow record her father used to play on Sunday afternoons, and she was so entirely inside her own domestic efficiency that she did not hear him come in. She turned and found Jang Minjun standing in the entrance of his own reception room, jacket open, tie loosened 1 precise inch, watching her with an expression she could not immediately name. It was not displeasure. It was something more considered than amusement. It was the look of a man who had walked into a room expecting to find it empty and found something that genuinely surprised him instead. She was aware of the buttons, the unzipped skirt, the fact that her hair, which had been neat and pinned at the start of the evening, had relaxed into something considerably more honest. She did not scramble. Scrambling was not in her nature.
I was just helping, she said. Calmly. Direct.
He looked at the tray in her hands, then back at her face. He crossed the room, picked up a glass from the nearest surface, and placed it on her tray. One quiet, deliberate gesture, like a man who had decided to participate. You didn't have to, he said. His voice, up close, was lower than she expected. Even. Almost warm. I know, she replied. I wanted to. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. They talked for 20 minutes in that reception room while the remaining staff moved quietly around them like water around 2 stones. He asked her how long she had been with the firm. She told him. He asked whether she had settled into Seoul or whether it still felt foreign. She thought about the ajumma who gave her extra fish cake without being asked, about the dry cleaner who had learned to pronounce her name properly, about the afternoon light in her Mapogu apartment. She said it felt like a city she was still learning but had stopped being afraid of. He listened to that answer with the full weight of his attention, which was, she was already discovering, a considerable thing to be on the receiving end of. He asked if she had eaten. She had not, actually. She had been too busy trying to be inconspicuous to touch the food. He led her to the kitchen without ceremony, found what the caterers had left covered on the counter, and put a plate in front of her like it was the most natural thing in the world. She sat on a bar stool in his kitchen at 11:30 at night, eating John with her skirt still unzipped at the side, and thought, privately, that this was either the beginning of something wonderful or the beginning of something she would need to survive. When his driver pulled up outside her building 40 minutes later, she said goodnight with a composure she was genuinely proud of. She watched the car until it turned the corner. Then she took the stairs to her apartment 2 at a time, sat on her bathroom floor, and called Temmie. She talked for 1 hour and 50 minutes. Temmie did not complain once. He fed you, Temmie said, at some point near the end. He found leftover food from his own catering and put it in front of me.
Jenny.
The man fed you in his kitchen at midnight. I know what it sounds like. It sounds, Temmie said carefully, like he is interested. And I think you should stop pretending you are not. Jenny lay back on her bathtub and stared at the ceiling and said nothing for a long moment. He's my boss, Temmie. He is your boss's boss's boss, Temmie corrected, which technically means there are enough people between you that you could argue the conflict of interest is minimal. That is not how any of this works. Make your move, Jenny. Good night, Temmie. She did not make a move. She went to work on Monday and was completely professional and did not think about his kitchen more than 4 or 5 times throughout the day, which she considered a significant achievement. Then 2 weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and coffee, she walked into the office and felt the shift before she even reached her floor. The particular quiet, the straightened backs, the dropped voices in corridors. He was in the building. She turned the corner and walked directly into the middle of it. Minjun moving through the hallway with 2 senior managers keeping pace on either side of him, a junior team parting almost instinctively to clear the way, heads dipping with that deep, deliberate deference she had observed a dozen times from a careful distance. The whole corridor performed its familiar ritual of smallness in the presence of him. Jenny, who had been raised by a woman who moved through every room like she had personally designed it, kept walking at her normal pace. She did not slow. She did not speed up. And when she was close enough that it would have been strange not to acknowledge him, she told herself, though that was only partially true, she looked up and said his name the way you say the name of someone you know. Min-jun.
Not sir.
Not the careful honorific the rest of the corridor was performing. His name. First name. Said with the easy confidence of a woman who had sat on a bar stool in his kitchen and eaten his leftover John and decided she was not going to pretend that hadn't happened. Something moved across his face. Brief, controlled, there and gone. But it was there.
Jennifer, he said.
The same register. The same evenness. She smiled, not a big smile, just enough, and walked past him into her office. The corridor behind her was so quiet she could have heard a paper clip drop. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, placed her phone face down, waited approximately 90 seconds, and then picked it up and texted Temmie. I just called him by his name in the corridor in front of the entire team. Temmie's voice note arrived in under a minute. It was 2 minutes 40 seconds long and contained mostly screaming and the phrase, I raised you well, repeated 3 times. What happened after that was quieter and more dangerous than any single dramatic moment. He began appearing at her office door when he was in the building, not always with an obvious reason. Sometimes with a question that could have been handled by email, and both of them knew it. He would stand in the doorway first, briefly, as though giving her the option to be busy. She never was. She would wave him into the chair across from her desk with the same casual ease she would use with anyone she was genuinely comfortable with, and he would sit, and they would talk. About work, sometimes. About the city. About a documentary she had been watching and mentioned once in passing that he had apparently also seen, which produced a conversation that lasted 40 minutes and covered 3 completely unrelated topics by the end of it. He was dry and precise and occasionally funny in the way that people are funny when they are not trying, the humor arriving quietly, almost accidentally, and landing harder for it. She made him laugh twice in that first proper conversation. Real laughter, not the polite social kind. She counted it privately as one of her finer achievements. He came back the following week, and the week after. The people around them noticed because people in offices always notice. Nobody said anything out loud, which in its own way said everything. Then came the Friday in Itaewon. It was supposed to be simple. A colleague's promotion drinks, a venue with good music, a group of them unwinding after a heavy work week. Jenny was on the dance floor when her phone buzzed with a message from a number she had saved under no name but recognized without needing one. VIP section. Come. She looked up slowly toward the mezzanine level and found his eyes in the low amber light without any searching at all, as though her attention had always known exactly where to go. She had not known he would be there. She had not planned any part of this. But Jenny's mother had not raised a woman who hesitated when the door was already open. She went to the bathroom first, fixed her edges, adjusted her dress, deep green, cut well, the kind of outfit that had been doing her consistent favors all evening. She reapplied her lip gloss with the focused attention of a woman who understood that confidence is partly preparation. Then she went upstairs. The VIP section was quieter than the floor below, lit differently, the music arriving as texture rather than noise. He was seated with a small drink in front of him he had barely touched, jacket beside him. When she sat down across from him, he looked at her like she was something he was still fully working out, and like working her out was something he found genuinely worth his time. She was magnetic that night in the way she sometimes was when she stopped monitoring herself and simply existed. She was warm and funny and present. She leaned forward when she made a point. She touched his forearm once, briefly, making a joke, and did not immediately pull back. She watched him choose, visibly and deliberately, to lean closer rather than further away.
He was not cold that night.
He was not armored. He was a man sitting close to a woman he was completely drawn to and no longer pretending otherwise. They left together. She did not announce it to the colleagues downstairs. He did not make a production of it. They simply left. His apartment was in Yongsan, high floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, souls spread out below them like a promise. She stood at the glass for a moment and looked out at the lights and felt something she recognized as happiness and something else she recognized, more cautiously, as danger. Not the danger of him. The danger of wanting something this much. He stood beside her. Close enough. And whatever careful professional distance she had been maintaining for months dissolved so naturally she almost didn't notice it happening. That night was extraordinary in the way that first times are when two people have been circling each other long enough that the finale of it carries the weight of everything that came before. In the morning she woke before him. She lay still for a moment in the gray early light and listened to the silence of his apartment and made a decision, the way she always made decisions, quickly, clearly, without prolonged deliberation. She got up. She found his kitchen. She found eggs. She was at the stove, his shirt on, the city beginning to lighten outside the window when she heard him come downstairs. But before we get into what happened next, I want to go back to something. That door. That corridor. Those 5 seconds where Jenny saw exactly what she was not supposed to see and then walked back to that party and picked up a wine glass and smiled at every man who came near her like absolutely nothing had happened. Now I've been thinking about this, and I want her honest opinion. Doesn't it seem suspicious that just after that happened, coincidentally other men began approaching her, like Wise Min Jun? Tell me in the comments. Tell me what you think about what's currently going on. And tell me which city you're watching from, because I want to know who is in this with me tonight. Now, let's get back to it. He came downstairs at 6:53. She heard him before she saw him. The particular weight of his footsteps on the stairs, unhurried, deliberate, the same way he did everything. She was at the stove, his shirt on, eggs in the pan, the soul morning assembling itself quietly outside the kitchen window. She had woken early the way she always did in unfamiliar spaces, that Lagos instinct of never sleeping too deeply somewhere that wasn't fully hers, and rather than lie there she had done what her hands naturally reached for. She had found a kitchen, and she had used it. She heard him stop. She did not turn around immediately. She finished what she was doing at the stove first, plated the eggs, set the pan aside, and then turned. He was standing in the kitchen entrance in his full suit. He looked at, and for one long moment the kitchen was silent. She felt it, the warmth of the morning, his shirt on her body, the smell of eggs and coffee, the city softening outside the window. She stood there in it. She let herself, just briefly, just for those few seconds, believe in the version of this that the morning was suggesting. Then he looked at his watch. Then back at her. Don't forget you have the latte tower brief on my desk by noon. Not good morning. Not last night. Not her name said the way he sometimes said it, with that particular weight she had learned to listen for. Just the brief.
The deadline.
The professional register arriving so cleanly and completely it was almost architectural, a wall that had always been there, briefly obscured, now plainly visible again. She held his gaze for exactly as long as it took her to make sure her face was giving nothing away. Then she nodded once. "It'll be there," she replied. He picked up his keys from the counter and left. She stood in his kitchen and listened to the front door close and did not move for a moment. The eggs were on the plate. The coffee was still warm. She looked down at the shirt she was wearing, his shirt, good fabric, and she felt something settle in her chest like a stone finding the bottom of still water. She understood now, not with the part of her that had been arguing and hoping and reading moments carefully for signs. She understood what she was in this kitchen. She understood what last night had been filed under, in the precise and organized mind of Jang Min-jun, and it was not what the morning had briefly, foolishly suggested. She rinsed the pan. She folded the dishcloth. She got dressed in yesterday's clothes and decided to hold on to the last form of dignity available to her. She let herself out quietly. In the cab, she sat with her hands in her lap and watched Seoul slide past the window and made herself a promise, quiet, private, that she was not going to keep giving mornings to something that ended at noon. She mostly kept that promise. For a while. Because the thing about Jang Min-jun was that he kept coming back, and he kept being the version of himself that made the promise hard to hold. Not the 6:53 version with the keys and the brief and the wall. The other one. The one that appeared in her office doorway with a question that could have been an email. The one that remembered, weeks later, the name of the restaurant she had mentioned once in passing and asked if she had been yet. The one whose laugh arrived quietly and without warning and landed somewhere in her chest she had not given him permission to reach. He came to her office on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks after that morning, and they talked for an hour about something that started as work and became 4 other things by the end of it. He came back the following week. And the week after. And each time he left, she sat at her desk in silence he left behind and had a very honest conversation with herself about what was happening, and each time arrived at the same conclusion, that she was falling, slowly and completely, and had perhaps already fallen further than falling implied. She told Temmie all of it one evening, stripped the comedy she usually wrapped hard things in. Laid it out plainly. The mornings, the office visits, the laugh, the hair, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, and the way he had walked out of his own kitchen that first morning without once looking back. Temmie listened to everything. Then she said carefully, "He's giving you enough to stay, and not enough to hold. That's not confusion on his part, Jenny. That's a choice." Jenny sat with that for a long time. "I know," she said finally. "So, what are you going to do?" She had been asking herself the same question for weeks. She had been watching him for the answer, looking for the thing that would tell her she was wrong. There were moments that argued her case. Real ones. The gentleness that arrived in him sometimes with a suddenness that seemed to surprise even him.
She was not imagining that.
But their time together existed in a sealed compartment. Beautiful inside its walls, but sealed. No one in his life had ever met her. No evening had ever extended into something that looked like a future. And every morning, without exception, ended the same way, with him assembled and departed, and her left holding whatever the night had made her feel, alone. She chose a Tuesday. His kitchen again. Morning light. Coffee in her hands going slowly cold. She had not planned the words. They came out the way true things do, quietly, without performance, simply present and asking to be answered. "What are we?" He stilled, set his cup down with deliberate precision, looked at her directly, the way he always did, the unflinching quality she had come to rely on as the one consistent thing he gave her. "You work for me," he said, even, unhurried, almost gentle, which was somehow the version that landed hardest. "What happens between us? I haven't placed it in a category. It isn't something I think of as something that could be placed in one." She waited. She gave him the full silence in case there was more. There wasn't. She nodded once. She stood. She picked up her bag with steady hands and walked to his front door, closed it behind her without a sound. She made it half a block before she stopped on the pavement and breathed. She called Temmie. Temmie picked up on the second ring. 10 seconds of silence passed between them. Then, "He told me I'm just his employee." Temmie said nothing for a moment. Then softly, "Are you okay?" Jenny looked up at the flat gray sky. "No," she said honestly, "but I will be." She started walking. Slow at first, then steadier. He said he hasn't placed it in a category, which means he hasn't ended it either. "Jenny." "I'm not done, Temmie." Temmie exhaled slowly. "Then don't be reckless," she said. "Be smart about this." "I'm always smart. You're on a pavement outside a Korean Mafia boss's apartment at 7 in the morning with your heart broken calling me. Not your smartest morning, baby." This time Jenny did laugh. Real and slightly broken at the edges. "Fair," she said quietly. She kept walking. The city kept moving. And behind her in that high-floor apartment, she could not know that Jang Min-jun was still standing at his kitchen island with his coffee cold beside him, staring at the door she had closed so quietly, like a man who had just said exactly what he intended to say and was standing in the aftermath of it, discovering, for the first time, that meaning something and being right about it were not always the same thing. What Jang Min-jun told himself, in the beginning, was that it was necessary. He had built his organization on one principle above everything else, that information, uncontrolled, was the only thing that could truly destroy him. Not rivals. Not law enforcement. Not the carefully managed enemies who respected the boundaries of their arrangements. Information. The wrong person knowing the wrong thing and deciding, for whatever reason, fear, money, principle, accident, to let it leave the room it belonged in. That was the vulnerability that kept him precise. That was the thing he never left to chance. So when his head of security came to him 3 days after the company launch and told him that one of the firm's coordinators had been seen in the East Corridor, the corridor that led to the meeting room, the corridor that had no reason to draw a guest who was simply attending a party. He had listened without expression and asked 2 questions. How long was she in the corridor? And did she open the door? The answers were 4 to 6 seconds. And yes, briefly. He had looked at the security footage of Jennifer Johnson standing in that doorway, and he had made a decision from that day on that he needed to know what she had seen, what she had understood. Whether she was the kind of woman who stored things quietly and waited for the right moment to use them, or whether she was simply someone with an unfortunate sense of curiosity and no idea what she had walked into. He needed to assess the risk, manage it if necessary, contain it. That was what he told himself. So he began appearing at the firm more frequently. He found reasons to move through her floor. He stopped at her office door the first time with a question that was genuinely work-related, barely, but genuinely, and he watched her answer it. He watched the way she held herself, the way she spoke, the way her eyes moved when she was thinking versus when she was performing. He was good at reading people. He had survived long enough to be extraordinarily good at it. She was not performing. That was his first assessment. She was precisely what she appeared to be, sharp, warm, unbothered in a way that was not practiced but simply natural to her. She did not have the particular quality of someone carrying a secret they were managing. She had the quality of someone who had tucked an uncomfortable thing away and decided, cleanly and practically, to leave it there. He came back the following week. He told himself he needed more data. A single assessment was not sufficient. He needed pattern, consistency, a fuller picture of who she was and how she operated under sustained proximity to him. She called him by his name in the corridor and did not bow. He walked away from that moment and spent the rest of the afternoon doing other things and telling himself that her boldness was a data point. Confidence without deference could mean several things. It was worth understanding. He came back to her office. He stayed longer than the previous time. She made him laugh without trying, and he filed that away under nothing in particular, and left. He came back again. At some point, he could not locate the exact week, which should have told him something. He stopped framing the visits as assessment. Not because he made a decision to stop. Because the framing simply fell away, the way scaffolding comes down when the building no longer needs it, and he didn't notice it going because he was too occupied with the thing it had been holding up. He noticed what she ordered when they got food. He noticed the way she hummed when she was comfortable in a space. He noticed that she laughed with her whole face, and that her whole face was something he had developed a specific and inconvenient interest in. He noticed what she made him feel, in the particular sealed compartment of their time together. He noticed all of this and filed it under nothing. Because filing it under something would have required him to look at it directly, and looking at it directly would have required him to admit that whatever had begun as surveillance had become something his operational vocabulary did not have a clean word for. The morning after the first night, he came downstairs and found her at his stove, and his first thought, before the suit, before the day, was not about the organization or the meeting room or the East Corridor. His first thought had no strategy in it at all. He put the strategy back on with the suit. He said what he needed to say to restore the correct distance. He told himself it was managed. Then she asked him what they were on that faithful Tuesday morning with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug and her eyes completely steady, and he said what he had prepared to say. The true thing, the correct thing, and he watched her nod once and pick up her bag and walk to his front door with quiet dignity and close the door behind her without a sound. And the kitchen was silent. He stood in it. He did not move immediately. The coffee beside him was going cold, and the morning was continuing outside the window, and everything was exactly as it should be. The risk assessed, the boundary restored, the situation resolved with minimal damage. He had done what needed doing. He had been clear and direct and fair. She was an intelligent woman. She would process it and move forward, and so would he. He stood in the silence she had left behind. And something in it, the specific quality of it, the shape of the absence, the way the kitchen felt categorically different from every other morning he had stood in it alone, reached past every layer of control and strategy and self-sufficient precision he had spent his entire adult life constructing, and found something he had not checked on in so long he had half convinced himself it wasn't there. He sat down at his kitchen island in his full suit with his cold coffee, and he looked at the stool across from him where she had never actually sat because he had never let a morning become that, and he understood that he had not been assessing Jennifer Johnson for months. He had been in love with her. Not recently.
Not suddenly.
The feeling had no clean starting point because it had not arrived as a feeling. It had arrived as attention, as proximity, as the accumulation of 100 small choices to come back, to stay longer, to remember what she said, to make her laugh again and again simply because her laugh had become something he wanted in his life, without ever signing the paperwork on that want. He had called it strategy. He had called it assessment. He had called it management. It was none of those things. It was the most human and uncontrollable thing he had ever allowed to happen to him, and he had allowed it in complete blindness because he had never once considered that he was still capable of it. He had closed that room in himself a very long time ago. He had been so certain it was closed. She had not forced the door. She had not even knocked. She had simply been so entirely herself, so warm and direct and unbothered and alive, that the room had opened on its own, and he had not noticed until she was already inside it. And now she was on a pavement somewhere in Yongsan with her heart cracked open because he had stood in this kitchen and told her, with all the precision and control he prided himself on, exactly the wrong thing. He looked at his phone on the counter. He looked at the door. He picked up the cold coffee that was staring at him and threw it across the kitchen. And Jang Minjun, who had dismantled threats that would have broken other men, who had walked into rooms that made seasoned criminals lower their eyes, who had spent 15 years building a version of himself that needed nothing and no one and had believed in that version completely, sat in the silence of his kitchen on a Tuesday morning and understood that he was afraid. Not of the organization. Not of exposure or rivals or the 100 dangerous things that populated his world without touching him. Afraid of a woman who cooked eggs in his shirt and hummed fella and called him by his name in corridors without permission and had just walked out of his door not knowing that she had taken something with her he did not know how to get back.
Some stories are about love.
Some are about power. The most honest ones admit that these two things have always been in conversation with each other. That power without intimacy is just a very expensive loneliness, and that love without courage is just longing with nowhere to go. Jennifer Johnson walked into a world she was never meant to fully understand, and understood it anyway. Jang Minjun let someone pass the walls he had built not because he chose to, but because she was the kind of person walls forget to stop. What he said in that kitchen was true. What he felt when she left was truer. The question this story leaves behind is not whether they find their way back to each other. The question is whether a man who has made control his entire identity can choose something that requires him to be completely without it. And whether a woman who has protected herself by staying in motion can hold still long enough to let someone catch up. Now the questions belong to you. Do you think Minjun deserved to lose her in that moment? Or was he simply a man who didn't know what he had until it walked out the door? Do you think Jenny should go back? Or has she already given more than any woman should give to someone who kept calling her love by the wrong name? And if he came after her, really came, not with a text, not with proximity, but with the full weight of everything he finally understood, would that be enough? Tell me in the comments. Tell me which city you're watching from.
Tell me whose side you're on.
If this story moves something in you, hit that like button, subscribe, and come back for the next episode. Because on Afro-Korean love stories, we are never done pulling at the threads that connect the most unlikely hearts. I will see you in the next one.